Chris Gordy, Locked On SEC, joining me here on the show. Turbulent times over there in the Southeastern Conference. Of course, Oklahoma and Texas are new additions to the league for next season. But the big dog for a long time has been Alabama, Gordy, and they're going to look very different next year. I want your reaction to kind of everything that has transpired down there in Tuscaloosa with DeBoer coming in and the number of guys who have decided to leave the Alabama program that were impact players this year.
Yeah, it's crazy how quickly time moves. I mean, literally a week ago at this time, Nick Saban was still the head coach at Alabama, and we thought, oh, well, got to the playoff, came up one game short, but, all is right in Tuscaloosa. And then the news comes out that, Saban is leaving and all hell breaks loose. And, things move fast, man. I mean, this is crazy how quickly they have moved with Kalen DeBoer going to become the Alabama head coach. And he's working very quickly to assemble a staff, and it sounds like Ryan Grubb is going to be his OC. And in addition to that, he's bringing guys over from Washington as wide receivers coach Jamarcus Shepard, O-line coach Scott Huff, which coached the Joe Moore Award winning offensive line this year. So that's good news. And tight end Nick Sheridan all coming over from Washington. But the problem becomes, how many of those guys have ever stepped foot in the South? Now, Nick Sheridan coached at Tennessee back in the day, so he's got a little SEC experience. They are going to retain two coaches on the staff, running back coach Robert Gillespie and D-line coach Freddie Roach. They've coached a long time under Saban, but yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how quickly Kalen DeBoer, who I don't think has ever stepped foot in a high school in the state of Florida or Atlanta or, something like that. So he said, hey, I'd never been to the West Coast before either prior to going to Fresno and Washington, so I had to learn quick. Well, he's going to have to learn quick in the SEC region to start recruiting.
Well, that's true at some level. He'd also been the Fresno State offensive coordinator previously before he went to Indiana and then came back to Fresno to be the head coach for a couple of years. But the recruiting element of this to me is fascinating because DeBoer's going to have a lot of the same staff, as you said, a couple of holdovers from the Nick Saban era, but that staff up there in Montlake was not known for their premier recruiting classes. It was take guys who were already on the roster. Now, Alabama's going to have, I think, some talented guys that, maybe didn't play a ton this season, but certainly Alabama has stacked high-level recruiting classes on top of one another for really the last 10, 15 years in college football. But they did not assemble an elite recruiting staff, or at least they didn't make a push to have elite recruiting classes up at Washington. How do you think that translates down to Alabama, given that there are going to be a lot of similar faces from who DeBoer had alongside him up in Seattle?
Well, it's funny. You said Alabama's had a lot of elite recruiting classes. Spencer, they've even been either been number one or number two for the past decade. I mean, it's they're usually number one. But if
I was putting it softly. I probably was putting that a little bit mildly.
Yeah. I mean, if they're not one, they're two. Georgia got up there once. Texas A&M, we all know about that class 2 years ago. They jumped them and they were number one. But Bama's been right there, either the number one or number two recruiting class every year. No, this is where Nick Saban comes into play. The rumors are that Nick Saban will still have an office in the building. We know the morning after he announced his retirement, he drove onto campus at 7 a.m. and went into the office. Everyone's like, what's he doing? He was going to get on the phones and start calling players, calling recruits. He's there to help Kalen DeBoer. I think after the big announcement, I think all the higher ups at Alabama said, look, we got to have a plan here. Saban, you got to help us. You got to play damage control here and help us convince these kids. Because here's the thing, Kalen DeBoer is an X's and O's head coach. We know he's really good. His track record shows it. He's been a winner everywhere he's been. But it's going to take that Saban influence to help some of these kids go, trust me, this guy's got it. He's the real deal. Because a lot of these high school kids are going, I don't know Kalen DeBoer. I've never met him. He's never come to my high school before. He never came in any of my games. This is where Nick Saban gets on the phone and goes, look, I saw you last year. We offered you. We want you to come play for the Crimson Tide. Ain't a whole lot going to change from me to DeBoer. That's what they're going to try to sell over these next couple of weeks to kids at Alabama. But I would not be shocked if there's a lot of kids, Spencer, that say, I'm in wait-and-see mode because, I know what Lane Kiffin does at Ole Miss. I know what Josh Heupel's running at Tennessee. I know what Brian Kelly's doing over at LSU. We know what Hugh Freeze is doing at Auburn, or building at least. We don't know what Kalen DeBoer is going to do as Alabama head coach. So it's going to be a tough sell. And like I said, Nick Saban's going to play a big part in this and trying to bridge that gap.
Yeah, and it's a unique situation because you have the outgoing head coach being willing to make a pitch like that, whereas Jed Fish at Arizona is not going to make a pitch to guys as to why they should stay at the University of Arizona. I think just the opposite. He's going to try and get guys up to Seattle with him as he embarks on that new journey as the Washington Huskies head coach. But for Saban to not be there and for DeBoer to come in, I don't know how you can expect the recruiting to stay at the same level that it has been at under Saban. It could still be very good. They could churn out top 10 classes every year, but is it going to be a top 5 class every year? Is it going to be that sort of transition? I'm really not sure because the Alabama brand is very strong, but it was just never a priority for DeBoer when he was up at Washington. So do you think that creates an opportunity for other SEC schools to say, hey, 3 years ago when Saban was there, they wouldn't have let this kid out of their sight. They would have had him locked up, period, point blank, end of discussion. Now you've got a 5-star wide receiver in the 2024 cycle, Ryan Anderson, who was verbally committed to Alabama. He's now crystal ball to go to Auburn because he decommitted from the Crimson Tide when Kalen DeBoer came over. Now, that's, a pretty common casualty when a coach leaves, but do you think that there is going to be a little bit of a recruiting vacuum down in the South with Saban out of the head coaching position?
Yeah, I mean, Ryan Williams, he committed or decommitted very quickly, and now Auburn has swept in there, and they're ready to grab him. But we just saw, too, the last day, Jamie French, a class of 2025 receiver that was committed to Alabama, he decommitted. So we're starting to see this. We're starting to see a lot of current players on the roster jumping ship, hitting the transfer portal. And so, look, it's to be expected. This happens every time a new coach takes over. There's always a period of transition, but it's a place that Alabama hasn't been in 20 years. They have not had to deal with this. And so it's amazing. There's a little grand delusion from the Alabama fans. I'm seeing a lot of them saying, oh, we're going to pick up right where we left off. That's just not the case. There's going to be a transition. There's going to be some kind of step back. Bama probably will lose a couple of games next year. And then I've seen some other Alabama fans who think, oh, well, Saban's still going to be around. He's just not the head coach. Like, he's going to be helping. Look, Nick Saban's got plenty of opportunities. He's retiring because he wants to be at home with his family. He's not going to be in the office every single day. He'll help out here and there. But I even saw one guy say, oh, well, Saban's just going to kind of be a figurehead. No, he is retired. Like, Bama fans are in for a rude awakening. I mean, they really do think that this is a guy that's going to come in and maintain this dominance that they've had. And it's nothing against Kalen DeBoer. He's been a great coach, but my goodness, he's been at the FBS level for 4 years, Spencer, as a head coach. Like, he was a coordinator for a good decade, bouncing around here and there. And prior to that, he was a head coach at NAIA, winning championships over there.
University of Sioux Falls. You put some respect on the University of Sioux Falls now. They are now Division II, thanks to what Kalen DeBoer there. I will have you know.
Well, as good as his dominant championships were over St. Francis and Carroll College, by no means are those Ole Miss, Tennessee, or Florida. Okay, like let's get with it.
So they're not. But this is also a guy who, in a full season of college football as a head coach, has never won fewer than 10 games. That's the lowest number that he has ever won. I don't expect that to change at Alabama. I think he comes in and he starts winning, and I think he starts winning very quickly at a high level. You do need great players to do that. There's no question about it. So 2 guys right now who have announced they're returning to Alabama are quarterback Jalen Milroe and interior offensive lineman Tyler Booker. So those are a couple of pieces, but certainly it takes a lot more to build a competitive football team in the SEC, even at Alabama. But I expect DeBoer to come in and be able to win quickly. But the name, and this is just the perfect example, it's a transfer example, and I think it's going to play out on the high school front as well, of what we're talking about, of other teams kind of trying to pounce on this opportunity and make the most of it. Caleb Downs was a big-time recruit to Alabama. He was a 5-star safety. He is a great football player and has been for some time. Is he going to be on Alabama's roster next year? I don't think anybody can say with any certainty that he will be.
Well, this is where NIL comes into play, and Bama's got a lot of money to play with. They haven't had to do it, right? I mean, Nick Saban's been kind of going the traditional route. They've taken care of some guys. Bryce Young got paid very well, a few guys here and there, but they've sold a lot of their recruits on, hey, come here to our football factory. You're going to play for a championship and be a first-round or second-round pick. Like, that's what they've been selling the past, since Saban's been there. And now they do have the boosters to pony up a little cash and start paying guys and take care of them. And so, look, that's going to be the first selling point. But there was a video that surfaced after the SEC championship game where Bama beat Georgia. Kirby Smart's on the field. One of the first Bama players he goes up to and hugs and embraces is Caleb Downs. And a lot of people are taking that video to say, oh, Here comes Georgia. One note on Georgia, they just stole Alabama's defensive backs coach, Travaris Robinson. They call him T-Rob. He's the one, if you recall, when they were getting ready to play Ole Miss earlier this year, Lane Kiffin made the mistake of, I don't even think Nick Saban's running that defense or Kevin Steele. I think that's T-Rob. It looks like T-Rob's running that defense. Well, T-Rob was very well respected at Alabama. If you looked at any Bama fans the last week, every one of them was going, oh my God, we got to keep T-Rob. Well, in comes Kirby and Georgia, and they steal T-Rob. Already they stole defensive back Jake Pope coming from Alabama over to Georgia. Caleb Downs, Georgia's going to come full court press after him. It's imperative on Alabama and their boosters to do everything they can do to keep him. But, hey, maybe Dan Lanning and Oregon come calling. I mean, there's going to be a lot of people interested in some of these guys on Alabama's roster.
Hard for that to not be the case with so many talented players there and so many talented recruits that are still lingering in the 2024 cycle, like Ryan Anderson, for instance. Chris Gordy, Locked On SEC. We're going to get to the top 5 transfer portal quarterback moves that we have seen so far in the country, but for now, we'll let Chris go. Appreciate the time.
Thanks, Spencer.